Good morning. Welcome to the Foundation Series Summer 2017 Summit. Thank you all for being here. My name is Girish. On behalf of IITM Foundation and all the folks that worked towards this, welcome you to this event today. We are so privileged to have a number of incredibly talented and well-known people here today amongst all of us. People have come all the way from from India and many other places. Even though on a weekday, my commute from East Bay is much longer than that. So thankfully today it's not. Again, welcome today. We really want you to participate in all the stuff today. Please, at the end of the day, our objective is for you to make long-lasting and highly productive collaborative environment with people. So please make sure that you network with people, talk to folks, take the time to do that. And if we can be of any help in making sure you want to meet somebody, any one of us who's been involved in putting this event together can help you. I do want to start off with a quick joke, just morning, everyone wake up. So Melania Trump was at a beach last week, and a bottle came ashore. She opened the bottle, a genie came up. And the genie said, you saved my life, ask me for a wish. Melania quickly, she's just so good. She said, can you solve the North Korea crisis? And the genie looked at her and said, come on, that's impossible. Never been done, can never be done. Ask me something else. She said, can you improve Donald Trump's approval rating? The genie looks and says, where is that Korea Peninsula map again? So talking about genies, really, IIT Madras really didn't need any genie, actually, to become the #1 engineering institution in India, right? No genie, and in fact, they did it 2 years in a row. So it's incredible. So we have among, of course, Professor and Director Bhaskar Ramamurthy and Dean and a lot of professors and entrepreneurs are here. And they're going to share with us why and also how IIT Madras can continue to be a leading institution in India and across the world. Again, a couple of small reminders. One is please turn your cell phone in silent mode or vibrate so that we don't hear different music today, even though we would love to. Number two, we do want to encourage you to come and ask questions and participate. Only request is, please make sure the questions are shorter than the answers, right? So, but there's a mic right here, and as our keynote speakers will, once they discuss, we encourage you to come here, form a line, please participate, ask questions, and so on. We're going to have a full packed schedule today, so we want to keep everything in time. So we're going to make sure that we stick to a very, very strict timeline. And Rajendra is sitting here with a very accurate watch. So again, with that, without further ado, let me welcome Seshan, President of IITM Foundation.
Thank you, Girish, and welcome everybody. On behalf of Vijay Olal, myself, and all the other board members, and most appropriately for Director Ramamurthy and Dean Ram Nagarajan, for coming here with all the other 13 faculty members, including Professor Satya, who happened to be around, and we roped him in from Los Angeles. So he's also here, and we are very grateful that they all made the investment in time. And the 5 founders, actually 6, one of them brought his co-founder along, and these are the youngsters whose stories you're going to hear later this afternoon. We are very, very grateful that they made the investment in time. So it is important for you to engage with them during and after the session, obviously, this evening. Thank you all, and I just want to introduce very briefly one of our distinguished alumni, Venki Harinarayanan, who is of the Jungli and Cosmic fame. More importantly, now he's become a second-time VC. I think 2 different VC firms he's running. So it was his idea that we recruit Venki Ganeshan as the keynote speaker, and we were successful in doing it. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Venki.
Hi there. So I wanted to introduce Venki Ganeshan to you guys. Venki and I have known each other for a long, long time. I remember meeting him like 15, 20 years ago right now. He was a kid. We were all kids, I guess, then. And Venki was like, amazingly argumentative. I remember that. Everything I said, he had the opposite point of view, and he was right on everything, right? So I was like amazed when I talked to this kid, and he was just like on top of everything. And I was thinking to myself, he's going to go really far. And sure enough, he has. I don't know if you made the right turn into the Marriott here. There's a company called Palo Alto Networks that we made a turn past. That is one of Venki's companies, one of the ones he invested in. And so he's had a string of successes, first at Globespan and more recently at Menlo. And prior to that, he was an entrepreneur. He started a company called Trigo that he sold to IBM. And sort of to showcase his smartness, he's a undergrad from Caltech. So got everything here. Whatever. We won't hold it against you. Yeah. So, thank you. Yeah, sure.
I think I'm good. I don't need it, right? Perfect. I want to thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. It's really exciting. When Station called me up, can you hear me okay? Perfect. When Station called me up almost 2 weeks ago, and he sent me a text, and I was at a partner meeting, and he said, would you be able to come in? I wanted to make this happen. And so I wanted to make it happen for a lot of reasons, but mostly because I feel very privileged to have this opportunity. I did take some notes. I think the way we're going to try to structure this keynote is have me blabber for 20 minutes. And hopefully you'll get through that. And then we're going to try to make it a very interactive question and answer session. And my goal is I hope you'll ask the tough questions. And we will really try to have an authentic conversation. Because the last thing we need to do on a Saturday morning is to sit and listen to generic stuff that doesn't move the needle. But I did want to say a few words. And it's particularly exciting for me because I actually get to do something with my fellow family members, which I never get a chance to do. And I know nepotism is always an issue, but I'm pretty sure that I wasn't asked to speak because my cousin, Krishna Anna, is here. But I thought I'll at least share with a couple of stories from the beginning. So I don't even know if Krishna Anna knows this story. I'm trying to see where he is. But, oh, OK. So when I was 11, I heard that my cousin was going to go to America, and he was going to go to Drexel. And until then, I'd always been focused on going. I had this dream of going to England. I always wanted to go to Oxford or Cambridge. And now I hear someone in our own family is going to Philadelphia at Drexel. So I said, great. As an 11-year-old, I got a letter, and I wrote this long 3-page letter to Krishna about how, really, now that you made it, can you wave a magic wand and figure out how I can come to America? So I wrote this, I poured my heart out, spent all this time, and I sent the letter. And I waited. Every day I would come back from school and say, is there any letter for me, any letter for me? And a few days later, the letter was back. And I was so excited. And I went back and I realized I had not put stamps on this letter. And so the post office returned it back saying lack of postage. And that was actually one of my first lessons, because I learned there's no magic wand in life. No one else is going to change it. You have to decide that you have to make it through. And I think that was very reflective. I didn't send that letter, but it captured to me in some ways what sometimes we take for granted. We just hope that somebody out there is going to change our life. Unfortunately, that's not true. You have to do it yourself. The second person I want to acknowledge is my parents are here. Now, my parents never come to any of my events. They actually probably have never seen me speak. And so it's particularly exciting for me that they were in town. I invited them. I do want to say that when I think about all the sacrifices my parents made, I feel really grateful because in some ways I think that exemplifies, for me and my sister, my parents put everything on the line all the time. And I'm very thankful for that, Dad. And then I wanted to tell you about a third story because I know there are lots of educators here. And someone who played a pretty interesting role in my life was my 7th grade math teacher, Mr. Krishnaswamy. And I've never had a math teacher like that. And what was interesting about him was that I remember this very distinctly. One day he was doing a trigonometric proof, and he stopped in the middle, and he was like, "What's wrong with you people?" And everyone in the class was quiet. They didn't know what he was talking about. Turns out that he had done this proof, and he had made a mistake, and he was hoping that somebody in the class would actually correct him. And the thing is, until then, I was used to teachers who just basically wrote a bunch of stuff, he regurgitated it back. No one actually expected people to think. And here was this professor, this teacher who was like, no, I expect you to think. I expect you to challenge me. I expect you to make a bunch of decisions on your own. And that was very inspiring for me. And then he would actually give me math problems after class because I had an aptitude for math. I remember, we'd do these math problems, and this was probably the only place in America, I can say this because I'm going to say this in Tamil, he would say, after I do these problems, some of which I'll get right, some of which I'll get wrong, he'll say, "Dey Maraya, nee ipdi math pannena, IIT enga, IITI kuda unnala po mudiyadhu." So Unfortunately, he passed away in 1997, but if he's up there, I want to tell Krishnasamy Sir that I finally did make it to IIT, maybe not in the way he meant it. And so I do want to, I bring that up because I think there's a lot of people who play a role in where we go. And sometimes when we get there, we forget who they are and how they make that happen. And I think that's just not at a family level, but even at a broader society level. And so when I got here, and I came to America when I was 16, and I ended up spending a lot of time thinking about American history. And I don't know how much, and so I became a citizen, and when you become a citizen, you actually end up taking the citizenship test. I actually took it pretty seriously. I spent a lot of time learning US history. And there's some really interesting elements of US history that has always resonated with me. The first notion is this notion of civil society. This notion of civil society has always been there. It's not been new. Socrates had it in his dialogues. But there was a French diplomat named Alexis Tocqueville. Now, Alexis this is the 18th century, he was part of the Napoleon government. And they sent him out to America, because America was this like new young country, started in 1776. The French actually helped America get independence. And they said, well, go and find out what's going on in this new country. So he came over here, he traveled all across America, and he wrote a couple of really seminal books. And in one of those books, he talked about civil society. And I'm going to read that passage, only because I think that's helpful. But before I do that, I want to define to you what civil society is. So, civil society, this is according to Wikipedia, which is the answer to everything, is the aggregate of non-governmental organizations and institutions that manifest interest and will of citizens. Civil society includes the family and the private sphere, but is distinct from government and business. It is how society organizes itself outside of government and business. That's really important, because I think when we think about what happens is we have government and we have private enterprise. Private enterprise is driven by profit. Government is driven, depending upon your system of government, by many things. But the notion is there a third rail, a third place in society, which is institutions not driven by profit, but organized by people outside of government. And turns out in America, in the early 17th century, there were a ton of these. And this is what Alexis Tocqueville wrote in his book. He said, Americans of all ages, all conditions, all minds, constantly unite. Not only do they have commercial and industrial organizations in which they all take part, but they also have 1,000 other kinds, religious, moral, grave, very general and very particular, immense and very small. Americans use associations to give fetes, to found seminaries, to build inns, to raise churches, to distribute books, to send missionaries. Everywhere else in the world, there's usually a head of a new undertaking. The government in France, a lord in England. But in America, there'll be an association. And this is really interesting idea, because until then, in most places, when people organized and did stuff, they usually did it either because it was the king, the ruler, someone did it, so that's the government, or they did it because they wanted to make money. But the notion that people will get together, come together to create an institution of a higher purpose so that everyone else in society can benefit is a somewhat unique phenomenon. And it's now prevalent all over the world, but it really started its roots in America. And there's a reason, it's because of that, in many ways I would argue, America made the progress it did. So I made a list of the top 37 wealthiest foundations in the world. How many of them do you think are American? 23. How many of them are Indian? 1. The Azim Premji Foundation. Of the top 10 colleges in America, 8 are privately funded and been privately started. The 2 who are UC Berkeley and UCLA. And I was talking actually to the dean of UC San Diego yesterday, and turns out UC San Diego's total budget from the federal government is 7%, and that includes the medical school. If you take out the medical school, it's 3%. So even a publicly funded institution only takes roughly 3% from the federal government. What does that mean? It means private citizens as a whole have funded the rest. Why is that important? We'll get to that in a second. But think about it, 8 out of the top 10 institutions in America have all been privately funded. Now, they do get government money, they get research money, but they bid for that research money and grant money like everybody else, but they don't have a direct line. I'm not necessarily saying that's good or bad, but it does mean that they control their destiny. They are organized as a group to go and push forward with a set of missions, and they're able to raise money, both privately and from public sources, to go after the mission. And that's really important because it feeds into how a society evolves. And so the other anecdote I wanted to share is, I was thinking about perhaps another dean in American history. It turns out a dean of engineering school, so not too different from many of the deans in this room. He had a few problems. Most of his graduates, after they graduated, left. This sounds familiar? They left somewhere else because they felt like they couldn't make their career locally. He was not happy about that. They also felt that they had to go away to get recognized. Nobody recognized them when they were here, so they had to go outside to get that recognition. It was very hard for him to get funding. There was no funding available. He wanted to do more stuff with industry, but there was no industries available around here. And so he was trying to think about how he's going to solve this. Now, this is in the 1950s. So what did he do? He took a bunch of university land. So it turns out this university did have a lot of land, and he rented it out to high-tech companies and startups because he figured that way he could get more collaboration, because if you're giving the land for basically cheap, you'd get more collaboration between them and the faculty and the researchers. He actually encouraged 2 of his students to start a company, and he funded it himself. And he was an incredible recruiter. So much more than an academic, he was an incredible recruiter. He kept track of people everywhere. And whenever he heard anybody anywhere was good, he would spend time recruiting them, calling them, emailing them, convincing them to come. Who is this guy? His name is Fred Terman. He was the dean of Stanford Engineering School. Hard to believe, but between 1945 to 1960, all Stanford graduates in engineering wanted to go east to MIT. It meant to go to MIT or Harvard. That's where you made it. I mean, it's hard to believe now when you think about everyone coming out here, but there was no industry here. He ended up working with Hewlett-Packard to set up, HP. So Bill Hewlett and David Packard were his students. He encouraged them to start it. He put SRI together, and SRI ended up brought in a company called Varian Associates. I say that because in the long scheme of things, 60 years is not that long. But in 60 years, he changed Stanford from this sleepy place in Palo Alto to arguably, at this point, the epicenter of innovation all over the world. And it took one person with a vision, a lot of hard work, some luck, but it's possible. And so, I encounter people all over the world coming in and saying, what is the magic of Silicon Valley? And, there's no amazing magic about it. It's not that complicated. But it does require you to have the willingness to do it. And I say this because if you think about my own life, I have benefited immensely from civil society institutions. I came to America on a Rotary scholarship. So Rotary is a civil society organization, which is funded by a bunch of people. They paid the way for me to come out. I was able to go to undergraduate institutions in America, both private, Reed College and Caltech, on scholarships that somebody else gave. So somebody else funded a chance for me. And when I started as an entrepreneur, I got venture funding from VCs who actually get their money from civil society institutions. So when you look at Menlo Ventures, we get most of our money from nonprofits, universities, institutions, foundations, all of which are privately funded. There is no government money. Well, there is actually a little bit of government money that comes from the state pension funds who invest in us, but there's no government money, no grants. I bring this theme up, not because I don't think that government is good or government is bad. I bring this up to a sense of independence. If you want to build an institution of enduring value, you need to make sure that the institution can control its destiny. And you control its destiny by thinking about how you get a group of people aligned around that mission to fund it. Problem with government funding is it's very subject to the whims of what happens in the political world. Some days it's going to be great and you're going to get a lot of cash, and some days it's not going to be. And the challenge is it also comes with strings. And how you find that balance. And that doesn't mean you can't work actively with government. Government played a very important role in almost all the big innovations in America. So Larry Smarr, who was the head of University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, which is a public institution, he got funding from the NSF to do supercomputers. He was the first person to realize that you can put something on the internet. So he funded this project called Mosaic with a senior student there named Mark Andreessen. That was how Netscape was born. That's where the Internet Explorer came in. That's where the Apache Foundation came in. So can government funding and science funding, think about the trillions of economic value created by someone, a government bureaucrat funding the browser, or the internet, which is created is ARPANET, which is an NSF Foundation grant. So when you think about some of the most incredible innovations we have made, GPS, wireless spectrum, they've all come through public-private contributions and collaborations. Having said that, I feel like one of the ways in which India needs to grow is to figure out how we can have very strong civil society institutions that can help pave the path. Invariably, I always hear, everybody wants to spend time on the budget. What's going to happen in the budget? What SOPs is which industry going to get? What subsidies am I going to get? That always felt like a defeatist mentality. So you're waiting for somebody up in Delhi to decide what you should do, where you should go, how you should play the system. And I have found over time that it's much better to trust yourself. Trust a group of people around you. Control your destiny. Don't let bureaucrats anywhere decide it, which is not to say you can't work with them, but figure out how you can do that. And I bring that up because, and we'll take a bunch of questions, but I think India is at an amazing inflection point. If you look at the population of India, 50% is below 25. There's a tremendous amount of human capital out there that needs to be unlocked. And we know that, right? There's the existence proof is there. You just have to look at the success of Indian Americans all over the world to say there is no shortage of talent and our ability to compete globally. But how do we make sure that people can do that in India? And here, my own personal experience, because I think sometimes capitalism has this bad word. I knew when I was growing up in India, capitalism had this bad word about how it meant somehow exploiting labor. It meant that it came at the cost of someone else. That's not been my experience, because I really think that it doesn't matter how much political freedom you have. If you don't have economic freedom, you're not free. When you are hungry, it doesn't matter that you have all these rights. Because I run into all these great conversations people have about, China is not free. What do you mean they're not free? They just moved 400 million people from poverty to middle-class standards. If you can't eat and you can't put a roof over your family and you can't give them safety, what does freedom really mean? How are you free? So any notion of freedom that doesn't start at the beginning in giving people a chance to have a quality of life is flawed. You can't have political freedom without economic freedom. You need to have both, right? So I'm not saying you just want economic freedom. You need both. But to think that you can have political freedom without economic freedom, you are not addressing the real issue. So to me, I have found, and again, we all are prisoners of our own bias, but I have found capitalism to be the best way to give poor people a chance. And one evidence of that is just go and look at social mobility in socialistic countries. Take a list of the top 50 companies in India and ask yourself, how many of them were created in the last 10 years? Take a question of the top 5 companies in America. So the top 5 companies in America last year, at one point, the 5 largest market cap companies were Apple, Alphabet, which is Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and Amazon. 3 of them did not exist 20 years ago. 5 of them have only existed in the last 30 years. These are the 5 largest market cap companies. Now go and look at the 5 largest market caps in India. Which one of them was created in the last 30 years? You'd struggle. And the reason is that social mobility, that ability to move up, decides in society where it is. What percentage of people today? So let's look at Florence, Italy, for example. In Florence, Italy, they keep great tax records. And they have tax records from the 1400s. And here's what they found out. The same families who paid the vast majority of taxes in the 1400s, 80% of them were still paying the most amount of taxes in 2000. Is that because they are the only smart people in Florence? No. The system set itself, there was no social mobility. It was stuck. You were stuck in your status in life. And that's great for the people at the top. Not so great for the people at the bottom. And the only system I have found that has successfully moved people from the bottom to the top is capitalism. That doesn't mean it's equal outcomes. Equal opportunity does not equal equal outcomes. Equal opportunity means you have a chance, not you don't have a guarantee. And that's where the delta in life is. You want everyone to have a chance, not a guarantee that they can have. And so part of why I was excited here is that I think we have an opportunity with the IIT Madras Foundation to build something. There's nothing magical about what Thurman did with Stanford. There really isn't. You can replicate. All the things you want are there. You have an incredible talent. I mean, anytime you run an exam and you only take 3,000 people, I don't know what the number is, out of 1 million people, I don't care what it is, you're going to have amazing talent coming through, right? I mean, that is what India has. India has large numbers to your benefit. Now, the question is, how do you bring those people in? How do you create a culture? How do you spend a lot of time trying to make sure how we can make them successful? And how do we, as a group of individuals, both protect, support, and nurture institutions, right? India needs institutions. So if you take out the government and you take out the large business houses in India, where is civil society? Where is that middle ground that is not government or business that can keep society moving forward? That's not necessarily driven by a pure profit goal, and it's not driven by the politics of the vote bank. And that middle place, if we can build it, allows you to get to a more liberal, fair, independent society. And you build it by supporting institutions like IIT. And it's IIT, it's other places. The more civil society institutions we can have in the middle that have their goal to push society forward. Again, it's not going to be perfect. I've learned a long time never to let perfect be the enemy of good. But if we can keep moving forward as a society and give people that chance, I think we'll build a much more resilient, better outcome. I'm going to end now, only because you don't need to listen to me all day. We'll take questions. But this is a quote I always have in my office. It's from Margaret Mead. It says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." And so all my experience in my life has told me that I will take a small group of committed people any day. And we do that. I'm not just saying it. This is exactly our business. 41 years of venture investing. We have created $300 billion of value. Biggest company to date is Gilead Sciences, which is a company that's worth around $100 billion. We incubated that company, 3 people in our offices. Second biggest outcome is a company called Uber. We let the Series B in. In every case, it's a small group of people coming together because they believe, taking on everybody. In Uber's case, it's literally taking on everybody. And I would bet behind that small group of people any day. And we have that opportunity. I hope everyone here enjoys a great day and thinks about how they can build amazingly strong civic institutions, including IIT Madras, so that we can keep moving. And Martin Luther King always said, the moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends towards justice. But it doesn't bend by itself. It bends because there are people out there bending it. So please, please, please bend it, support it, and let's keep moving forward. Okay.
Hi, I'm from the East Coast, by the way, from Wall Street. And I just wanted to say, Silicon Valley didn't come out of the blue. There's a precursor to that, where the government was involved in building the underlying framework with the space program and with other programs where the money has to be spent first.
Right.
And that's where India is. India has to spend the money to build the framework for entrepreneurship to develop and evolve.
Actually, just one sort of clarification on that, because I went to a history of Silicon Valley.
Yeah, that's Schottky transistor.
Your point is absolutely right, except it started with World War II.
Yeah.
And this was a place to detect incoming sort of, I think radar was what they started here, and that's how the whole thing sort of
that is a collaboration between the UK and
Exactly.
India.
Yes.
I mean, case in point being, I don't know if you saw the recent movie that came out, Imitation Game, where Turing invented the machine. Can you tell me what they did with the machine after the war? They shut it down. They said it's a state secret. We don't want it going out. But unlike that in America, they developed the whole computer industry. So that's...
Yeah, and I think it's a good point. Like, not for a second should anyone think that any of us like live independent of others, right? And it's not like Silicon Valley sort of magically grew up one day and became a big company. It became because it's a combination of things that other people did, whether that is NSF funding. If you think about it, Terman went and worked with Vannevar Bush, who was at MIT, who started the NSF. Yeah. If he didn't start the NSF and figure out how to get science funding out there, but he started it in a way where it wasn't like which politician liked which person and how do you take your begging bowl to Washington to cut a check. It was like, let's have a bunch of academics, let's have people apply for grants, and then let those independent body make a decision. And that chain of events resulted. And so to me, there's a whole chain of events that results in something happening, but it starts with how do we inculcate civil society institutions that are independent, and how do we give freedom to people? I mean, at the end of the day, freedom to operate economically is also a freedom. I still remember my formative experience in the 80s and thinking about all the licenses you had to pick in India to go, right? Every time, I mean, I have a simple formula. You can just tell how good a country's economy is going to be by the number of laws they have. Basically, the more laws you have, the less people are going to implement the laws, and the more idea it is for people in government to figure out how to make money out of you, right? So in essence, what happens in India is people write more laws. Every time I turn around, they've got another regulation coming in. But they don't enforce any of them. So the only penalty is for the people who actually follow the rules. Because in essence, everybody should say, okay, well, there's so many laws, there's no point in following any of them. So then you create an incentive structure that's different. And I'm sorry if I sound like a libertarian, but I've been on this side, and I just thought about it. When I think about investing in India and I look at every rule required, is the starting assumption is everyone in business is a crook, everyone is trying to cheat us, and they're going to come and take our money. Like, most people who have invested in India have not made money.
Yep.
And they're so worried about people making money. Like, you want people to make money. That's why people come. Why that's something we should be afraid of, I don't understand.
Next question.
Vengi, this is Kannan. Thanks for a great keynote. My question has to do with getting a civil society and scaling it out, right? But India is on a different scale. And what are your thoughts on that in particular? Because you mentioned the top 5 market cap companies in this country, and they're all recent. One of the challenges with that observation is that the number of people who actually benefited from those 5 companies has dramatically shrunk. So if you look at the previous generation of companies, it could even be the HPs of the world, or even before that, General Motors and the like. The number of people who benefited from those companies becoming big was way more than the number of people who benefited from Google or Facebook becoming as big as they've become. So that's one side, and so that's one question. The second question is, what do you think, at a high level, I understand we're all discussing here, what do you think are the first 2 things or 3 things that India and IITM Foundation should begin to engender, right? We need a big win, that's fantastic, but how do you think this challenge of the number of people we need to affect is an order of magnitude larger than here? As it is here, it's becoming harder and harder to affect lots of people. So I just want to get your sense for ideas on that.
So actually, let me just rephrase the question, because I wanted to sort of ask the same question.
Yeah.
So I read this book a few years ago about the 1849 gold rush, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the biggest problems they had during the gold rush was San Francisco Harbor was unusable, because once the ship docked in San Francisco, the whole crew would run off.
Correct.
To go get gold, right?
Correct.
Which means, to your point, everybody was participating in this process. With Silicon Valley right now, to your point, it seems like it's restricted to a small number of people, right? The recent elections were a good sort of indication for us.
Absolutely.
So what do you think is our obligation towards everyone else in the US and the rest of the world?
Hi. So completely agree with so if you think about WhatsApp, WhatsApp was sold to Facebook for roughly $20 billion, and they had less than 80 people in the company. So I can't think of another example in the world where there was so much value created but went to so few people. If you think about what it took for companies to get to a $20 billion market cap, usually they had like 5,000 employees or 10,000 employees, some cases 100,000 employees, and here you had 80 employees make that. And I think that's just part of where technology, the increasing returns to scale that technology offers you, I don't see that changing. But what that means is that we have to figure out how we address people who are left behind. And I do think that people have been meaningfully left behind in the digital divide in the US. And that's part of the reason why we had the election result we did. I think that this phenomenon is going to happen worldwide. Income inequality is increasing worldwide. It's increasing in India, it's increasing, the metric economists use is called the Gini coefficient. And if you look at the Gini coefficient, it's increasing worldwide. So this is not a America phenomenon, it's a worldwide phenomenon. And what I've always found is there's a very easy way to reduce income inequality. Make the rich poorer. That's what everybody loves, right? That's easy. Make the rich poorer, then you've reduced income inequality. But here's the thing, making the rich poorer doesn't make the poor happy. What the poor cares about is getting richer, right? What you need, what someone cares about is how do I increase my wage and my quality of life better? And what we actively need to do in Silicon Valley working is how do we figure out how to increase the wage of the average person? The average wage in America has not increased. At the 50th percentile, they have had no increase in the last 15 years. I'll tell you, that person doesn't care what the top 1% or the top 0.1% makes. They care about how they can get, if they can get the income up and the quality of life up, and so I think we need to spend a lot more time thinking about that. No easy answers though.
Hi, my name is Venkat, or Venki for short.
Okay.
Go for it.
Venki, I already like you.
There are a few of us, a few others out here, so I think if the most popular name here probably is shared by us. So my question is, first of all, thank you very much for a wonderful, I like the examples that you quoted, and they kind of resonated with me. So the question that I'm going to ask is kind of a little larger question in terms of trying to connect the dots, because you brought up, excellent points on social mobility and economic freedom, and also the point that 50% of the population in India is below 25 years of age. Now, I'm wondering how many of them are really in school versus college or in the workforce, and you'd probably bet that most of them are still younger. So, which means how do we from an IIT Madras Foundation and IIT Madras perspective, how do we contribute or influence that social mobility? I'm just thinking aloud here, and for me, I think education is a great way, or probably an important way to help people achieve that social mobility. And my observation is that the fundamental education system has not really changed that much, whereas the opportunities and where the trends are going are a totally different set of skills needed for the future. So your thoughts on how IIT Madras and the foundation can kind of identify and help contribute to creating that upward social mobility?
I agree, and trying to think about the education system in India is, it's complicated and way above my pay grade, right? But what I do know is that it is failing for a lot of people. I mean, people have this very confused perspective about American schools versus Indian schools, and I have a perspective because I did 1 year of high school in America, and I went to probably no one here who lives here would ever send their kids to the schools. Probably, if you look at API school, I went to a very small school in a small town called Buckley, Washington. It is a white Hickville town. 400 students graduated. Only 200 actually went to college, so 200 did not go to college. Another 200 went to college. Probably 180 went to a community college. So this would not be a school that anyone here who lives in America would send their kids to, okay? But that school had more facilities than any school in India. It really did. It had more facilities than any school in India. It was a public school. So the opportunity to get an education was there, even in that school. And so to me, we have failed. When I say we, I think India has failed in terms of not getting public education to equality. And I think some of that is just money, and some of it is just how to do it. We have some great private institutions that cater to the 1%, maybe the 0.1% in India, and that institutions send people, some of them end up at IIT Madras, they run companies like Google and Microsoft, but that doesn't confuse the fact that the average Indian has very little access to this. And I think we need to do that. The one thing I'll tell you that I think really makes a difference, so it's the thing that I'll say is like the number one thing I focus on in my role at Menlo Ventures is culture. So I think the biggest impact you can make to attract talent is culture. So I'll give you an example. At Menlo, we always have companies come and present, right? And everyone there knows all the reasons why the company won't work. We know that. But I always ask, well, what are the reasons the company will work? How do we make it work? And thinking about what happens if it works versus always thinking about what happens if it doesn't work is just a change in how you think about what happens. Because everyone in the world, and this is particularly true in India, everyone can give you all the reasons it won't work. That's easy. But what is the reason why it will work? How do you make it happen? How do you change the context of the world to be, it's okay to fail? If there's one thing that Silicon Valley is really good at, it is not taking failure as the end, but as the beginning. Like the roots of the most successful products come from failures of the past. There's a lot of things that went into the iPhone that came from the Newton. And somehow, in a very resource-constrained world like in India, failure is fatal. I remember distinctly like taking my 10th standard exam. I did okay, not great. And somehow I felt like my life stopped right there. And the idea that any failure so early in your life can be fatal is just, I think, it changes how people think about it. They are more afraid of losing than hoping to win.
Hi, C. Mohan with IBM Research. Since we don't know each other, plus most people here probably don't know who I am, and I'm going to say certain things. I'll give you some background. I've been with IBM for 35 years.
I know who you are, though.
Oh, you know. I'm a very different kind of guy compared to the Silicon Valley crowd, and so to that extent, I've tried my best to make people think about slightly different things than just starting companies and making money and so on. Innovation is equated too often in this part of the country to startups and such. People don't think enough about long-term technical careers and research. In fact, somebody else made that point earlier about how Silicon Valley came about. And part of the cultural problem we have is that people don't value enough those people who spend lots of time doing deep technical stuff and staying technical for a long time. And I have a problem, and when I was the IBM India chief scientist, I tried to go around giving talks, encouraging people to engage in long-term technical careers and not keep jumping from one job to another just to make a few paise more, or since society values management so much, if your business card doesn't say manager, the people think you haven't made it in life. Even people who otherwise don't have any aptitude for management wind up, as soon as they can get out of their technical role, very good techies even.
Yeah.
They all aspire for this moving up the management stack, you know. And
Mohan,
somehow
are you
the society has to change.
Are you talking about India or?
India.
India. Okay.
India, yeah.
Got it.
So for us, since we are talking about trying to improve the situation in India, we need to encourage, as a society, respect for technologists. And of course, the government tries to do a number of things and all that, but until you're a milkman and everybody else that thinks if you aren't a manager, you aren't made it in life, that kind of philosophy changes, we are not going to have enough innovation coming out. And just having startups, I don't believe, will be the solution to, you know, lots of stuff happening in India. And so I'd like to...
So I agree 100%, right? I mean, to me, whenever I see the number of IITians going to go to IIM right afterwards, I'm going, well, you just went to the finest educational institution, and you learned probably the best engineering degree you can get in India, but now you're going to decide to be manager. And I understand, by the way, I don't blame anybody. Like, I think at the end of the day, telling people you should stay in India because you do this or you should do this, I don't believe in guilt. I believe in letting people have the freedom to make the choice. And the reason why they make that choice is they know they'll make more money going to IIM and being a CEO. So probably IIT trains more CEOs than engineers in some ways, right? But I think it's a cultural issue in the sense of, do we value product? And I think that that's not just in India, it's true all over the world. Except in Silicon Valley, I think actually product people are highly valued. And when you look at the most successful companies, they have product CEOs. Those are the ones who make it. Sales and marketing CEOs eventually do. But somehow we got to get into the notion that building an innovative product really matters. I think I looked it up. Maybe the wet grinder is probably the biggest engineering innovation product that has come out of India. And there's nothing wrong with that. I like my dosas as much as anybody else. But I think we can do a lot better than just a wet grinder.
Yeah, so basically my point is the technical career path should be valued, encouraged, and rewarded appropriately. I mean, just as an example, in my case, 35.5 years, I've never been a manager. And I'm not saying everybody should follow that, but IBM respects fellows so much that I never felt that I had to become a manager. And in the Indian companies, they are not encouraging enough of this technical ladder. And I tried my best talking to Narayan Murthy, the whole works, but...
Yep, I agree.
But at the same time, can I add something? The only thing is, jumping jobs is not such a big thing if you want to be a multidisciplinary innovator, essentially. So, I mean, sometimes you might have to do that, in the Silicon Valley world.
So my point is, you need to stay on one topic long enough to internalize what the difficulties are, what the problems are, before you can innovate. If you keep switching jobs just to pad up your resume with all sorts of acronyms, every 2 years, if you jump to a different topic, that's the problem.
Got it.
Okay,
Next question,
Sailesh.
guys. Let's move on. Yeah.
Hi, I'm
Missions to Mars,
No, that's fine. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sailesh. I wanted to ask you a question about how you would grow a pie in the context of our ecological situation right now. I've been working with villagers in Rajasthan for the last 10 years in civil society, and I've seen how the forest is dying. And people are migrating. They used to be hunter-gatherers, and now they're migrating into the slums. How do I go tell them, work your way up the ladder, and the pie will get bigger when the economy is already 60% larger than what the planet can support by most measures?
Very important question. And obviously, we only have one planet, and there are real costs to the decisions we make. And the problem we have is it's an externality, right? So when I put carbon emissions, I don't feel it today, but I am actually pumping up the temperature of the ocean. And that'll take hundreds of years. It's not like I can change that process. But you need some market mechanism. So I don't have the answer. But I also think that, I try to think about this. I work in the paradigm that every human life is equally valuable, right? And so I need to balance how I think about human lives 50 years from now versus a human life today. And if that human life today doesn't get a quality of living and standard, then it's very hard for me to value the human life 50 years from now when we don't do that today. So what I'm trying to say is it's really that balance, and we need to figure out. And I think probably if you net it all out, most of the emissions in the world today have been put by the US, right? The US industrialized, put all these emissions out. So whatever agreement we have in place, it can't come at the back of not letting middle class or lower income folks in India and China move to the middle class. Because the US was able to do that, we need to figure out. And how we do it in an ecologically sensitive way that proves. And by the way, I'm actually more optimistic about these issues now than I've ever been, because I look at the consciousness of young millennials all over the world, in India, everywhere else. They are much more conscious of the impact of the footprint we live. And so when that consciousness comes in, I think people will take that into account when they make those situations. But I don't know exactly how to balance it in between, because my feeling is it's very hard to make the argument, oh, let's not industrialize. You stay in the village and have the quality of life, but then you're going to see on the TV the quality of life someone has in urban India, but you don't go and have it.
Yeah, if I might, just change your time perspectives a little. You talk about 50 years, but 58% of all wild vertebrates got destroyed between 1970 and 2012, and they're declining by 3% per year. So by 2026, we'll wipe them off the face of the earth at the current rate of destruction. So put that in perspective.
I think it's a good point. I don't know how you, what he can address with that, right? So he's only one guy. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Monishi. 1970 batch IIT Madras. Last year, a delegation from Tamil Nadu, government delegation, came here, and in Thai, we had a meeting, and the Thai gurus were telling about how India should move towards product development rather than doing this low-cost labor arbitrage work that they do in India right now. And this guy made a very sensible point from the government. He said, look, we got this massive bank of unemployed people. Our goal is really providing jobs, so we are not looking at automation and all that kind of thing. And even when we look at Silicon Valley, I talked to a Google guy, no, not Google, Amazon. He said, our cloud is going to decimate the IT population in Silicon Valley because we're going to do everything internally. It's going to be so easy that every user can directly operate. I think Trump's facing the same problem with the coal belt. You're going to have a lot more joblessness the more successful Silicon Valley is. So where do you strike that balance?
I think the biggest thing, my advice would be, is we need to create a stronger domestic economy in India. I think India has taken a very exports-oriented approach towards IT, which is fine, and they've done well. But you look at the domestic market in India and compare it to the domestic market in China. So China has 3 big internet companies, Baidu, Tencent, Alibaba, none of which actually have, they have less than 1% of their revenues outside China. And each of them are over $200 billion market cap. So they created a domestic economy that's not export-driven. And I think our answer is that you've got to create a domestic economy that's strong. And I don't necessarily think, I don't buy the services product divide. You can do, innovation always does have job losses. 60% of Americans were doing agriculture in the 1900s. Less than 3% of Americans do agriculture today. But we figured out new things to do. Part of it is, I don't know what it is, but my belief is we will find new things for us to get employed on. I know we got to stop. Okay.
I'm going to have one question for you here.
One last one.
Yeah.
I'm a perfect blend between you and Mohan, okay? So I also came out, like Mohan, out of very large research institutions. I'm Chino. The way I look at it from a value proposition, because that's the most critical thing for the human mind, if you will. Value is created in many ways culturally and across continents as well. East, west, doesn't make a difference coast-wise or not. So the way I'm looking at it from an IIT perspective, there's a reason why there are 2 I's in IIT. One is the ego part, that I can do it. And I think that's a very important thing. Fundamentally, what the IITs would do is create the value in the human mind as they graduate, that they are able to do what they wish to do. Don't think about money all the time. Yes, today I'm
Can you
also
get to the question, please? Because
so
we're
the
running out of time.
question is, so the question really is the value platform that we should embed in the minds of people as they come out, so that they are thinking more effectively.
I think the biggest value platform is that anything is possible, and I think that's, and I think now more than ever, I think about growing up as a kid in the 80s in India versus now. I actually look at the young people in India and I look, they know anything is possible. Now, just knowing it is not enough. You also have to have the willingness to work hard for it and put in the hard works. And I think that's really the value system you want to have, is to give people the opportunity and then make sure they have the skills to do it.
Yeah. I had one last question for you, Venki. So Silicon Valley is built on immigrants, okay? And if you look at over the last few years, especially over the last year, with Trump coming into power, definitely has been a slowdown of immigration from India. How do you think that affects the business model of Silicon Valley in the long term? Do you think it is going to be fatal? Do you think it is going to be a...
Yeah, well, we can't end any session without at least one Trump question.
Yeah, exactly.
My favorite Trump stat, though, is to say that even the Trump administration shows it's possible for an illegal immigrant to get to the highest job, because we do have a first lady who's an illegal immigrant.
Okay. I'm not going there.
so I think that, no, all kidding aside, I actually have spent a lot of time in Washington with the NVCA on this issue, and spent a lot of time. As much as the rhetoric is one way, I don't really think that the long-term effect of Trump's policies is going to change immigration. There's definitely a short-term impact. There's short-term impact on travel. I think
More the question is the brand, right? Just like you were saying when you were young, you wanted to come to the US.
Yeah.
It's not, when you have a sort of a brand destroyer like Trump, young people stop dreaming about coming here.
And I agree with you. And I think that will have a huge impact in terms of, I think people are thinking about Canada, they're thinking about Australia, they're thinking about Germany, and it opens up. Trump has opened up the opportunity for that virtuous cycle of innovation we have had to stop, because, you know, if you're a smart IIT Madras grad, you're now looking at a lot of places. It was not immediately obvious to do it.
Yep.
That impact is real,
Yep.
and it's long-term, because it's a psychological impact. You've
Exactly.
opened the door. My only counter to that is still, at least from an innovation startup standpoint, the best capital out there still remains Silicon Valley capital. Now, that's not going to be true forever,
Yep.
but at least for now, that's the gap. And now what's going to happen is the money is going to go and invest where they are,
Yep.
as opposed to here,
Yep.
which is a net negative for America.
Yep.
We're going to lose jobs and we're going to lose wealth, but you and I will survive.
Yeah, that's true.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause. Venki Ganesh and Venki Harinarayan.